For the week of August 14th, for your ears only, I'm David Alpern.
I'm Eddie Robinson.
The crash that they were in was so horrific, and the state of the remains, there was no easy way to look and see this is this person, this is that person. They were all together.
All across Afghanistan, the insurgents are losing. They're losing territory, they're losing leadership, they're losing weapons and supplies, they're losing public support, and across Afghanistan, more and more, the insurgents are losing resolve.
Looking at the remains, Dover Air Force Base spokesman Van Williams could hardly believe the devastation that had engulfed 22 SEAL commandos, 8 other American fighting men, and 7 Afghans when their lumbering Chinook helicopter was brought down just 60 miles from Kabul. Next day in Kabul, Major General John Allen, commander of U.S. and NATO forces, proclaimed that the Taliban killers had been tracked and killed themselves. But the optimistic picture he painted of Afghanistan seemed strangely at odds with the fact that the deadliest day yet for Americans there came after nearly 10 years of a war they were supposedly winding down.
With special insight on the slaughter of the SEALs, including some from the same Team 6 that killed Osama bin Laden, as well as on the war itself, American strategy in the region and beyond, for your ears only, we're joined by Juliette Kayyem, former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, now a columnist for the Boston Globe and Boston.com. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
We learned last week that special operations raids against Taliban leaders in Afghanistan have almost tripled since 2009. But was a backup mission like the one involving that Chinook helping elite Ranger forces in trouble a proper one for SEALs specially trained for secret commando operations?
You know, that's a great question, and that's what the independent sort of review is going to assess. I will tell you, as a non-military person, when I heard it happen, it seemed like a lot of people in one relatively vulnerable helicopter. What people have to remember is that 10% of casualties in Afghanistan now are helicopter casualties. These are important modes of transportation given the geography of Afghanistan, but obviously anyone who's seen one of these knows that they're exceptionally vulnerable. So as an operational question, I think that's the important one to ask for this independent review that's going on is, are we making our troops, in particular our specialized troops, more vulnerable as this thing winds down or as we start to shift troops and redeploy? As a non-operating person, I can't answer that, but I will tell you that is something I've heard from a lot of military people. Just question mark, since we just have to figure out what was the mandate there in terms of putting that many guys on one helicopter.
Also seems like a kind of an ordinary backup mission for people whose job is to sneak in at night in small groups and do really pinpoint jobs. What is the fact that the Taliban forces had already pinned down the U.S. Rangers only an hour from Kabul? What does that say about how degraded the strength, savvy, and resolve of the Taliban is?
You know, it's funny, the two quotes that you had at the beginning, both the devastation and the sort of the opposition or the Taliban is being devastated, might both be true. I mean, or they're both true. And that I think is and what I wrote about is the challenge of Afghanistan, right? Is you could kill a lot of people, but you have no idea sort of what's behind them, and this is what the Russians discovered in their long battle in Afghanistan. And so that, to me, is the quintessential question of sort of the exit strategy for Afghanistan is we won't leave on any terms that we can necessarily dictate. The exit strategy by 2014 in Afghanistan is one that we have no idea what we're leaving behind. And I think we have to begin to admit that to ourselves. A number of independent groups and assessments, and certainly something that I wrote about, we're sort of marvel at the fact that sort of outside of Kabul, it really does seem like it's still not secure. And so an hour from Kabul is relatively close. If you were talking about the Afghan-Pakistani border, I'd understand that, right? That's the hinterland. So these are the questions that are really difficult to answer, and ones that I sort of, have been raising in terms of, our exit strategy in some ways is sort of irrespective of how much we're leaving behind, because it may be true that we are killing a lot of people. We just don't know once we leave who is going to be in charge. And it's not a happy story. I don't mean that as sort of a let's wash our hands of it. I mean, we certainly know that the history of Afghanistan is not necessarily a good news story.
Juliette, one of your columns last week said that all the praise for the SEALs after the killing of bin Laden undermined the the secrecy that helps make them so effective. But was that really a factor in this case, or was the Taliban ready to pick off any reinforcements that arrived?
I think, if that's not what I intended by that point. I think what happened after SEAL Team 6 became this public entity, right, and movies about them and books, from former guys coming out, being bestsellers, is that what we have to remember is all that focus on them makes them a very different type of operational force than when we didn't know about them. For one, they're just somewhat notorious and famous, so that when you hear, just even like your previous question, when you hear SEAL Team 6 was there, you're thinking, wait, there's something must have been different about that raid, right? Why would you have so many SEAL Team 6 guys there? And it may be that the raid was more high-value Taliban or Al-Qaeda targets than we know right now. And it does worry me. I am definitely compliment the Obama administration. Certainly, I think what they did in terms of getting bin Laden and the fact that no one knew, right, until the night of, has been amazing. And it's that sort of secrecy that I think does protect both sources and methods, and then obviously elite units like SEAL Team 6.
If the official investigation of the SEAL slaughter indicated that the weapon that brought down the copter came from Iran, as so many others have, do you see greater pressure on Washington to order covert or overt retaliation? Some conservatives are complaining that Iran has been aiding and abetting the killing of U.S. forces for decades.
Right. And the truth is, they probably have. I mean, what we have to understand is both in Afghanistan and Libya, all of these, in Pakistan, all these efforts are somewhat of a Cold War, or actually quite a warm war, so to speak, that nations like Iran, let alone Saudi Arabia, or as we see in Syria, Turkey, that you have these nations that are asserting their influences in ways that we have no control over. And our best strategy in dealing with that complicated dynamic is, cooperate with countries that might be able to take a little bit more of the pressure off of us. So, for example, our Syria strategy is clearly dependent on what Turkey needs and wants right now. I don't think that's bad. I actually think that's good. As it goes for Iran, I'm not a big fan of saber rattling. Everyone knows Iran is a problem, but the truth is that our options are quite limited. We have excessive sanctions against Iran. We are trying to get international cooperation against Iran, but it always makes me nervous as having seen this done several times over the last 10 years of this sort of, now we have to get Iran because they're the big enemy. No one denies that they're a big enemy, but the options are quite limited given that military options are essentially off the table for us, not for others. And obviously we have a tremendous covert but probably covert activity going on in Iran right now.
Juliette Kayyem is a former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, now a columnist for the Boston Globe and Boston.com.
Quote from the news, "Step forward if you want to lose your sons. Otherwise, calm down and go home, please." That was Tariq Jahan, father of a man killed in the continuing English riots, pleading for calm. British Prime Minister David Cameron seemed less interested in the possible social causes, including new government austerity measures, than in wholesale arrest, prosecution, and threatening to limit internet and cell phone use by mob organizers.
Next, Wild Wild Wall Street, the downgrade and deficit, for your ears only.